Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on endocrine communication. This is part of our Module 5 series, and this is basically the fourth section where we're going to be having a look at hormonal communication. What we're going to be doing in this video is having a look at specification reference 5.1.4a, endocrine communication by hormones. First thing then is we need to understand what this endocrine system does. And basically, the endocrine system is all about communication in the body. So what we're going to be utilising in order to communicate from one part of the body to another are hormones. And hopefully from our GCSE, we remember that hormones are going to be these chemicals that travel in the bloodstream. And because they are travelling in the blood, that means that they will reach all parts of the body. To build up to the A-level knowledge then, what we need to understand is that there are actually two types of hormone. The first type are the protein and peptide hormones. Now, basically, these are ones that you've encountered in terms of insulin and glucagon and adrenaline. All of these are protein and peptide hormones. In terms of some key features about these hormones that we should know. Firstly, they are not soluble in the phospholipid membrane. So because of that, they do not enter the cell. So in order for these hormones to actually have an effect, what they're going to do is bind to the cell surface membrane onto a receptor molecule there. And as a result of that binding to their receptor, they then release a second messenger inside the cell. So protein and peptide hormones do not enter the cell because they are not soluble in the phospholipid membrane. The second type of hormone are the steroid hormones, and these are ones you've encountered like testosterone and estrogen. Key thing about our steroid hormones is that they can pass through that cell surface membrane. Therefore, they are able to enter the cell and also enter the nucleus of the cell. So this means that they can actually have a direct effect on the DNA that's obviously stored within the nucleus. Let's understand then where all these different hormones come from. And basically they are going to be released by these things called endocrine glands. And the endocrine glands are ductless glands because they are going to release the hormones directly into the blood. So there's no little duct or tube that connects the actual gland to the bloodstream. It is directly from the gland into the blood. Now, when we're talking about these things called glands, these are groups of cells that produce and secrete that hormone into the blood itself. And therefore, they all have a good blood supply passing by them. To give you some ideas of different types of endocrine glands that we've got, in our little diagram on the right hand side there, you can see we've got our strange little person that we've basically split into half. On the left, we've got the male side. On the right, we have the female side. Now, there are, of course, certain glands that are in common between both male and female. So you've got things like the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, thyroid, thymus, your adrenal glands, and the pancreas. They're all in common between both males and females. Everyone has them. But when we come down to those reproductive regions of the body, quite clearly these are the ones that vary in men versus women. So obviously the males will have the testes, and that's where you're going to find the release of the male sex hormones, for example, whereas females will have ovaries, which are all to do with the female sex hormones. Just to remind you what some of these endocrine glands actually release, these are all ones that in theory you've met lower down your school careers. So thyroxine is released by the thyroid gland, insulin from the pancreas, adrenaline from the adrenal gland, testosterone from the testes, and estrogen from the ovaries. And no doubt at GCSE you actually looked at more than those hormones, particularly the ones to do with the menstrual cycle. As far as these hormones go then, they all have a specific function. So they are a chemical messenger that is carrying out a very specific role within the body. And what we actually find is that the cells that can detect these hormones, which we refer to as the target cells, may be grouped together, or they could be dispersed across a number of different tissues And in that instance, what we're going to find is the hormone that has these different target cells all over the body will have a much wider effect. If obviously all of those target cells are grouped together in one region, that's the only place that the hormone will affect. If we now have a little focus on these non-steroid hormones, the protein peptide hormones, these must have this complementary receptor on the plasma membrane of the target cell, because remember what we said, they cannot enter the cell themselves. Therefore, what's going to happen is, as that hormone is circulating in the bloodstream, when it reaches one of those target cells, it will bind to the receptor on the plasma membrane of that target cell, and that then leads to changes inside. And we mentioned that thing, a secondary messenger can be released inside the cell to actually have those internal effects. If, of course, there are other cells around that do not have that receptor, nothing happens. They are unaffected, because if the receptor isn't present, the hormone cannot bind to it, therefore no changes take place. So the phrasing we're going to use for these non-steroid hormones is a first messenger. Now, quite logically, they're first messengers because these are going to be communicating something and that first step of the process. So what we find is they're the ones that are going to bind to the receptors on the cell surface membrane, and then they release that second chemical inside the cell, the second messenger. So first messengers are the protein and peptide hormones that will bind to the receptor. Second messengers are inside the cell and will be released as a result of that binding of the first messenger. Quite often, these non-steroid hormones act via a G protein in the membrane. So when we've got that hormone binding to the receptor on the plasma membrane, the G protein becomes activated, and then in turn it will activate that effector molecule, quite frequently an enzyme, and that then converts an inactive molecule that's present in the cell into that second messenger, which then has the effect. And quite frequently what we're going to find is that the effector molecule we're talking about here is adenyl cyclase. Now, adenyl cyclase is an enzyme, we know that because it ends in ASE, and it's going to actually convert ATP into CAMP, cyclic AMP. Now, the CAMP is the second messenger. So what we're going to find is we have our hormone binds to the receptor on the plasma membrane. That then causes these changes, typically through our effector molecule of the adenyl cyclase. Adenyl cyclase converts ATP into CAMP, and the CAMP is that second messenger. So it will either have that direct effect on another protein, or it could trigger the enzyme cascade. And obviously an enzyme cascade is where we've got the product of one reaction then leading to another reaction taking place. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see when the next video is uploaded. And of course, head on over to the website where you can find a range of other resources to help you in your A-level biology studies.